What's going on now in the president's race is extremely complicated. And both candidates right now, and both campaigns, both red and blue, there's more tension than there's been during the entire time since the switch was made from Biden to Harris. Tension on the Republican side, which as of now we're going to talk about less tonight because the tension on the Democratic side is more newsworthy right now. In part is caused by President Trump's performance last night in Georgia, doing the exact thing that Republicans don't want him to do, attack Governor Kemp. Georgia is not just any old state, of course. It's a state where President Trump's some of his most impactful failures have occurred when he focuses on grievance and when he attacks his fellow Republicans. And it's a state that could, as much focus as there is on Pennsylvania now, it's a state that could decide the election. It's a state that whose electoral votes might make the difference between winning and losing. In addition, there's still no agreement within Trump world about exactly how they're going to run against Vice President Harris. And there's a lot of concern. Some Republicans believe it's going to be difficult for Donald Trump to win this race, just as there's some Democrats who believe it's going to be difficult for Donald Trump to win this race. And I've gotten extraordinary messages today from Democrats, not based on polling, but based on vibes, saying, ding dong, Donald Trump is dead. He can't win the election. I have Republicans saying that Harris can't win the election, and I have Democrats saying that too. In other words, people in both parties whose opinions I respect see very different current state of affairs. I see a close race that may end up not being close. I still believe either of these candidates could win this race easily, but more likely it will be close. And I don't think we'll know the contours of the Electoral College map until after Labor Day. I don't think anybody thinks nominee Harris is putting new states in play. The question is, how many of the 7 competitive states will she actually be competitive in? It may be all 7, but it may be something short of that. I don't think Donald Trump will ever be in a position where he'll have to give up on any of the 7. I don't think she'll be able to open up a lead in any of the 7 so pronounced that he'll have to give up. And that's a testament to an illustration of what remains an Electoral College advantage for him. Every piece of public and private polling data shows clearly that she's in a better position than Joe Biden was overall and in almost every battleground state, maybe everyone. But it's a little soon to say exactly where she stands because since she's been the candidate, she's had extraordinarily positive coverage. The 2 things I want to focus on today, besides looking at the polls and talking a little bit more about where the Trump campaign head is at, is 2 issues related to the vice president. One is the Veep stakes and what's going on there, particularly as it's exposed tensions within the Democratic Party. And the other is the question of the vetting of the vice president herself. Something I've made here repeatedly is people assume that if you've run for statewide office and won, particularly in a competitive state, if you've been a senator or a vice president, that you've been vetted at a level sufficient that there are no more surprises coming. We saw over the weekend that that's not true regarding the vice president and her husband. And one big question in this race now is there more information about her coming out? There's deep concern at some high levels of the Democratic Party that there will be. And there could be enormous implications for that. And we'll talk about that. First, I want to talk about Veep stakes. I don't know where it stands. I've gotten such conflicting information. As you know, my reporting for most of the last few days has been that Governor Shapiro was in line to be the nominee for the party. And I had lots of different pieces of data to suggest that was her case, reporting on both the supply side and the demand side. What's occurred in the last 5 days or so is really extraordinary. And it's partly extraordinary because I don't know anyone who has an explanation for why it is that in social media, traditional media, amongst interest groups, that he's being gone after pretty hard for his background, for his issue positions, for his political viability in terms of how much he'd help the ticket. No one else under consideration is being subjected to anything like that. And I don't know, is it being driven by Democrats, by Republicans, by allies of the other people who'd like to be on the ticket? Is it being put out by the Biden campaign as kind of a trial balloon or to put these things out now so they're old news by the time he's picked? I really don't know. And I don't know anybody who does know. I know people who will speculate about it. But one of the extraordinary things that happened is you've seen Bernie Sanders endorse the governor of Minnesota to be on the ticket. You've seen some labor leaders. You've seen attribution, not on the record, that Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi prefer Governor Walz. It's kind of incredible if you believe, as I do, that campaign was headed towards picking Governor Shapiro. It's a lot of very heavyweight opposition to the choice of Governor Shapiro. There are people close to the vice president who think Governor Shapiro is the best pick and a great pick, not just the best available, but a great pick. And there are people close to her who think it's a disastrous pick. And I find that the range of views about whether he would be a good pick or not to be extremely interesting because of the different analytical judgments people are making. But since a lot of the questions about whether he'd be the right pick or not, the best pick or not, connect to the question of his positions related to the Middle East and his religion, it's a very fraught topic. It's a very fraught topic. And obviously it becomes more fraught if you assume that the people trying to stop him are stopping him not because they themselves are bigoted against him, but because they believe he'd be a disastrous pick, and they're trying to head it off any way they can. The strongest things I heard today from some Democrats was that if she does not pick Governor Shapiro, because their assumption was, not just based on my reporting, but based on what they know, was that she would pick him. That if she doesn't pick him, that she's in effect bowed to the people who've argued against it, and that the people who've argued against it, whether they're bigoted or not, and I don't think in most cases they are, that they've argued against it in a way that will be very damaging to say about her that she backed away from picking him, even though she thought he'd be the best vice president, the best partner, and again, according to many of her advisors, or at least some of them, the best person to help them win, not just to help win Pennsylvania, but to help win overall. This is, as I said, an extremely fraught question, and obviously the lessons of it will be somewhat dependent on who ends up getting it. I think chances are, originally, at least one of the prospects was told he would be told tonight whether he'd be the nominee or not. I think that may slip until tomorrow. I think we will know by tomorrow. The event's on Tuesday. But this is turning out to be the first time I've heard discouraging words from very senior Democrats about the vice president. Some saying, that they will judge her harshly if she does pick him, because they think it's a disaster, that it will lead to bigger protests at the convention, that it will lead to a real challenge to win over certain voters, that there'll be tension because there's not going to be the level of deference from him towards her that they think is necessary for the bottom of the ticket. And there are people who think that if she doesn't pick him, it's a huge mistake, not only because, in the view of some, because she'd be backing down in the face of pressure, which is a big doubt about her, but also because they think he's the strongest, and to give up a chance to increase the likelihood of winning Pennsylvania, they think is an enormous mistake. I think that there's a little bit of surprise from his team, and his team is a very sharp-elbowed, very tough, very aggressive team. They haven't really done much to try to support his position, or as best I can tell, to attack the position of some of the other hopefuls. If you ask me today, I still think he's going to be picked. I think the second most likely is the governor of Minnesota. I think Senator Kelly is probably third. I hear mixed things about how much he's come back in the mix. The cycle that we're going through now, seen through a glass darkly, is very typical of what happens at the end. You look at some of the past Veep stakes where there's a front runner in the mind of the candidate and presidential candidate and advisors, but then negative information comes in and they start to scramble at the end and look at other options. In this case, it's obviously a very telescoped, very truncated process. And the stakes are very high because she's defining herself for a lot of Americans for the first time. If he's not picked, and it's Governor Walz, I think the party will rally around him. I think he'll be perceived as checking the box of qualified to be president. And I think the pick will be like Tim Kaine pick was perceived as solid, but not make people in the party, particularly exuberant. I just don't think he lends himself to that. If it is Governor Shapiro, I think it will be extremely controversial, which I've always thought would be the case. But based on what I'm hearing from some Democrats, more controversial. Remember, as President Trump correctly points out, it wasn't that long ago when not just the press, but President Biden privately, President Obama privately, and many other Democrats believed that she was not up to the task of beating Donald Trump. And that's why President Biden, in part, clung to staying on as the nominee. It's why there was a real effort to see if they could get Biden to step down from the nomination and not make her the automatic nominee on the hope that someone who they felt was stronger could challenge her. And because she's been so successful up until now and her team in winning the nomination quickly, in stage managing her public events, there hasn't been very much private and certainly no public discord about what was going on. A few dissenting voices who said in the pundit class who said it was a mistake to pick her because you were trading one weak nominee for another. This has opened up some negativity. And like I said, I'm not sure if Kelly is in play. I'm not sure what the reaction will be. I've already explained what I think the reaction to Wall will be. If it's Shapiro, it's going to be incumbent upon the campaign to really manage that process and to figure out a way to make it positive. He'll have a lot of support, and I've said repeatedly, I think his performance will surprise people, and that there'll be enthusiasm next week in their events in the battleground states and at the convention. But as I said, also this has exposed. This has resurfaced doubts about her judgment and about her ability to make tough decisions. And regarding tough decisions, or rather regarding dealing under pressure, I want to raise a sensitive issue of the story about her husband from over the weekend, and the reality that she's never been vetted at the level she's going to be vetted now. I haven't seen no speculation about where the Daily Mail story came from. But I think we all have to ask ourselves who had the motive and opportunity to plant that story and the timing. One theory is it was planted by the Harris campaign to put it out because they thought it would come out eventually in the context of the general election, on the assumption that beef steaks and the announcement of the nominee would overwhelm it and the story would be gone effectively. That might be true. I don't know. But I can tell you again, speaking about this somewhat elliptically, that there's concern of some people around her that that's not the last story of that nature that will come out. And if you say, well, what does it matter? If you look at who she's running against, what could she ever have possibly done, or her husband ever possibly have done that's as bad as what we know Donald Trump did? And my answer to that is informed by having covered Bill Clinton. When I covered Bill Clinton in 1992, he did things, and things about his past were revealed that no candidate was thought to be able to survive. And he just said, oh, I'm going to survive it. And he did the same thing in the White House. John Harris's book about Bill Clinton was called The Survivor for a reason. Donald Trump is the same way. You can say it's an absence of shame. You can say it's political sophistication and genius. You can say it's tenacity. Whatever you want to attribute it to in those two guys, they just don't play by the same rules. And the question, I think, the question in the minds of some Democrats is, how is she going to handle the pressure, the spotlight, the tension, the focus on her personal life if things of additional things are revealed? She's not Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. And again, one of the concerns that Democrats have had about her in the Biden-Harris White House has been her ability to handle things under pressure. Maybe she'll be great. But there's real concern about how that's going to be handled. And if you look at the people around her, including some of the Biden people and Obama people who've just been brought in, they're amongst the most skilled damage control people in the Democratic Party. That's not the first line on their resume, but it's a reality of who they are and what they have as a background. I think that this could end up being nothing in this race, and it could end up being everything. And we're all going to have to watch it, and we can talk about it more. Lastly, we've got some great pollsters on here, and I want to talk a little bit about the polling. I've said before, I don't really care much about the polling till after Labor Day. Things are too unsettled now. I've never cared much about national polling. The CBS poll that came out over the weekend had the race tied. I think as people have forgotten that if a Democrat's tied in national polls, that probably means Trump will win. It's important to remember that, but we don't know where the national polls are going to end up. And this CBS poll, like a lot of polls, has some flaws in it. There's some questionable things in it. I want to show you one question from the CBS poll that when Joe Biden was the nominee, put up the economic slide, please. When Joe Biden was the nominee, this was the question I urged everybody to look at. It's who do you trust more to help your family's personal finances? And when Joe Biden was the nominee, it wasn't a close call. Okay, here's the question Vice President Harris in there, whose policies would make your family better off. And you can see Donald Trump is winning this pretty decisively. Is that the only issue in the campaign? It's not. But it's a big issue. As we all know, the economics are always going to be a big issue. And I think we need to watch that as well as we go forward, more in the battleground states than nationally, but it's hard to get big enough polls in the battleground states that have those crosstabs. You can take that down. Lastly, I'll say that what Donald Trump did yesterday in Georgia really upset a lot of Republicans. They don't want to see him attacking Governor Kemp. They don't want to see a campaign of grievance. They want to see a campaign that focuses more on things like the economy. But Donald Trump has won a presidential campaign. He's come close in a second. And if for all the two challenges I talked about for the vice president, dealing with any more personal allegations and dealing with the deep stakes and the Shapiro question, for all those things, the more profound question is, can she win a presidential campaign? As I said, I know very serious Democrats who tell me the race is over and Harris is going to win, that Trump's magical spell is ended. I don't believe that's the case. I think that's a vibe analysis, not a data-driven analysis. And it doesn't take into account that he's 1 for 2, close both times, but 1 for 2. And she's if you count her 2020 race, she's 0 for 1. But if you talk about general elections, she's 0 for 0. And some of the smartest people in the Democratic Party, the 2 former presidents and the people around Joe Biden in the White House, they very recently had very profound doubts about her being the nominee. She's risen to the occasion so far, but I think those who want to declare the race over in her favor need to think more about an incomplete than about some sort of vibe-driven analysis that the race is over.